Now we move on to Virizion and Keldeo. I think this one makes a little more sense going through chronologically instead of in game order at the start, so that's what I'm going to do. Sometime before the game takes place, Virizion and Keldeo were very close friends. Keldeo taught himself how to use the Enter cards to create Magna Gates and went to the Great Glacier to find out the mystery of the Great Crystal, aka the Bitter Cold. Muna told him the truth about what the Bitter Cold is and invited him to join her ranks. Keldeo declined. Muna didn't take that very kindly, as her gang, along with Kiram, chased after Keldeo, but he was able to escape. Keldeo then pondered if Muna truly wanted to end the world, since it seemed like she had her doubts, and Keldeo thought he could return to the Great Glacier and make her and everyone else change their minds. Before he left, Keldeo wanted to make sure that his best friend Virizion didn't follow him and thereby also end up a target of Kiram and Muna. To do this, he sent a nasty letter to Virizion to intend to cut all ties with her in order to keep her safe. It read, quote, "The truth is that I never even intended to go to the Great Glacier. I just wanted an excuse to get away from you. We aren't friends anymore, just forget about me." Unquote. Then, once Keldeo returned to the Great Glacier, he found that Muna wouldn't hear his pleas, and he was captured as a prisoner at the Glacier Palace. Word got out that Keldeo journeyed to the Great Glacier and hasn't returned. Virizion searched for a long time for Keldeo to no avail, and then eventually received Keldeo's letter. When Virizion read that letter, she was devastated. She was closer to Keldeo than anyone else in the world, so hearing Keldeo disown their friendship warped Virizion's view of reality. If even Keldeo couldn't be a true friend, then who could? Even after adopting this nihilistic thought, to return to that idea, of friendship not being real, Virizion didn't stop obsessing over Keldeo. A part of her still believed in their friendship even if she consciously deemed it irrational. She began to aimlessly wander around the world. At some point, when she met Umbreon and Espeon, she asked them to one day take her to the Great Glacier in order to possibly see Keldeo again. This brings us back to the order of events as they appear in-game. The first time we see Virizion, she's making a visit to Post Town. All the townspeople are attracted to her because of her beauty and cool, calm demeanor, including Dunsparce. After saving Dunsparce and retrieving a present for Virizion, the player, partner, and Emolga all show up to help Wingman Dunsparce as he tries to get her to be his friend. Virizion says no. Not because there's anything wrong with Dunsparce in particular, but because she just doesn't make friends. She thinks that with the state the world is in, she doesn't believe in the concept of friends, only collaborative allies working for a common, tangible goal. She tells Dunsparce, quote, "If you were strong, I might be able to consider you as some kind of ally. If you were strong, you could at least help me out in some way," unquote. When you first see this line in the game with no context, or at least when I saw it, Virizion just seems like the most jaded piece of trash ever, and she kind of is at this point, but it gets worse. Once Dunsparce and Emolga leave, Virizion tells the partner, quote, "The world's full of cheaters, thieves, and liars. There's nothing to believe in anymore. Someone who acts nice to you always has an ulterior motive. You can't just believe anyone who flatters you with pretty words. Making friends will just lead to heartache and disappointment. That's why I don't have any," unquote. This says a lot about Virizion, mainly that she is quite deep into the nihilism train of thought, which is dangerous. She strings together a set of phrases that make some sense on your first impression. First, people are kind to you when they want something from you, which is usually true. Second, a strong majority of friendships and close relationships do not last forever, which is also true. Third, the end of such a relationship can lead to heartache and disappointment, which is true yet again. However, the way Virizion puts these thoughts together has a lot of logical holes that only make sense to someone with a highly negatively warped perception of the world. Her interpretation is more like people are only kind to you when they want something from you. Therefore, friendships aren't real, which is why they don't last forever. Believing in friendships only results in you feeling bad once it ends. There's quite a few logical leaps there, right? I can say that I've had plenty of times when a random stranger was nice to me, and many old friendships that I've had that got disconnected on positive terms, disconnected just because our lives went separate ways. But to her, it makes complete sense what she's saying, since she's been so distraught by what happened with Keldeo that she projects the worst possible interpretation of that friendship onto every friendship ever. And I find it interesting that when Virizion says this to the partner, they find it hard to disagree with, or at least put into words why it's wrong in order to retort. Remember, we're talking about someone in the partner who never had anyone close in their life until the player, and also had a rather jaded interpretation of the world as their reason for not making friends. Chances are that what Virizion was saying definitely resonated with the partner. Immediately after this comes this messed up segment in Swanna's Inn, where everyone cheers on Dunsparce getting rejected, because it happened to all of them also. Girder says that if the townspeople didn't laugh it off, they'd be done for, before immediately having this jarring transition into everyone crying. Being unapproachable, like Virizion is not a victimless act. Granted, the townspeople all have plenty of their own issues outside of this and aren't all mentally there themselves, so they are perhaps reacting a little strongly, as discussed earlier. But I have to admit that this crying session was a little disturbing on first playthrough. And I've mentioned that a couple times already with some scenes where it's like, wow, these guys are really, really deep into the, I guess, the mental issues rabbit hole, you know, and this is just another one of those examples. Virizion then hears about the Poniard brothers taking Dunsparce in, and gets mad and goes after them as a result, which seems a little confusing at first. Doesn't she not care about Dunsparce? Well, with the power of hindsight and knowing what happens later in the game, it becomes a lot more clear. The way she words it is, quote, taking advantage of the weakness in Dunsparce's heart with this dirty plot. You two really are pathetic, aren't you? End quote. Virizion saw that a most likely innocent Dunsparce was being tricked by someone he thought he could trust, the Poniard brothers, quite similar to how Virizion thinks that she was tricked by Keldeo. Of course, she's going to see a little bit of herself in Dunsparce and come to bring justice. After the fight, Virizion apologizes to Dunsparce, saying that it was her fault that he thought he had to get stronger. She then follows up by saying Dunsparce is far too trusting for his own good, and you can't live like that in the world we live in now. This time, the partner does successfully find a retort to Virizion and says, quote, I wonder if you're right about that. It's true that you probably shouldn't trust anyone you meet right away, but is trusting one another really such a terrible thing? Is it so wrong to believe in someone? I know there are a lot of dishonest Pokemon out there these days, but if you don't take that first step, then no one else is ever going to open up and trust you either, are they? You were right when you said Dunsparce isn't strong. He's not, but at least he can trust. That trust will make us a real force to be reckoned with. I think that trusting one another shows real strength. I think it's the realest strength we have. End quote. Virizion goes into deep thought for a bit, and then thoroughly agrees to the point of wanting to join the party. It makes sense when you consider that the partner's proposition of strength and trust is pretty much exactly what Virizion used to have with Keldeo, to the T. She knows firsthand that trust is powerful, and it is real strength. It's just that she's been so afraid to give any of her own trust ever since Keldeo. She really takes his speech to heart, enough that she remembers it at the end of the game when she tries to get Emolga to become more open by dropping the tough guy act. So, back to this part of the game. Virizion gets some pushback from Emolga for wanting to join the team, but she takes it in stride and continually admits that she was acting in the wrong earlier. She acknowledges that she still doesn't feel fully trusting, but will keep working to make trust feel more natural to her. She's fully confident in the process and has a lot of empathy for the party. After all, these are truly good people, and it's hard to find those nowadays. Now, let's again fast forward to before the first trip to the Great Glacier. Virizion talks to Dunsparce, encourages him to enjoy the trip, and ends up coming to the conclusion that Dunsparce going is more important than her going. But of course, there's another layer to this. It's not only that Virizion wants Dunsparce to go on the trip, but also that she doesn't want to go. She makes the decision to stay behind quickly and confidently, and protests when Emolga suggests the idea of drawing straws to determine who stays behind. I suspect that at this point, a part of Virizion doesn't actually want to see Keldeo anymore. Maybe she's getting scared now that the possibility of actually going to the Great Glacier is in sight, and she actually has to consider what it means to meet Keldeo again. Maybe he's still a jerk, and she has her heart broken once again. Would she be able to take that? Besides, Virizion now at least has a group she can feel comfortable around in the party. When she first met Umbreon and Espeon, it's fair to assume that she felt much more hopeless. She doesn't change her mind and agree to go to the Great Glacier until Dunsparce reveals that Umbreon told the party about Keldeo's letter. At this point, it really hits Virizion that the rest of the party not only truly wants the best for her, but thinks that potentially finding Keldeo is important to accomplishing that. Maybe she has formed new friendships with the party. It's hard for her to continue turning down the offer out of fear when it can be framed as letting your friends down and not just yourself. So, on the trip, Virizion finds a Frism left by Keldeo during his first trip to the Great Glacier. He sounds much more like the old Keldeo than the type of tone Keldeo used in his letter. Virizion is surprised, but now much more determined to find out the whole story. It seems that at this point, Virizion believes that Keldeo must have had a pretty good reason to send that letter. The faith in her friendship with Keldeo and the idea of friendships in general is coming back. This is supported by Virizion's reaction while leaving the Great Glacier. Quote, "Ever since I got that letter from Keldeo, ever since I read those words, I stopped believing that there was any such thing as a real friend. But the one who first planted that doubt in my heart, it wasn't Keldeo, it wasn't anyone else. The one responsible for that doubt in my heart was me." End quote. And she's exactly right. While, of course, she was definitely justified in becoming jaded after seeing that letter, that doesn't mean that result had to be a foregone conclusion. People go through adversity literally every day. Sometimes very high levels of adversity. But not everyone starts to descend into a toxic mentality because of it. People that have a stronger mental system to help them keep faith and resist the nihilistic thought are able to also resist the negative mental impact from these occurrences. This is Virizion's eureka moment where this point finally clicks for her. And this self-awareness and introspection is such a huge step in overcoming a negative mental pit. But her arc is not completely over just yet. After rescuing the player and partner from the desert, Virizion says that she finds it hard to imagine how the negativity of the world at large could be changed, and then clarifies that she doesn't really know how to make that change on an individual level, and doesn't know how to find those answers, and suggests that maybe there isn't a way. The partner then points out that surely there has to be a way to make change on the individual level if it happened to those in the party. most notably Virizion herself. Virizion sits on this idea and doesn't respond. The partner then tries and fails to get the town to be positive before the second Great Glacier trip. The party meets up and wonders what went wrong. Well, you already know that Virizion probably has a pretty good idea. Quote, I think everyone just knows that things don't always work out in the real world. No matter how hard you try, things can't always be fixed. And the simple act of trying sometimes makes things worse. I think everyone has had such experiences. And when you experience that kind of letdown again and again, then after a while, whenever anything happens, you find yourself thinking, trying just makes everything worse. Unquote. Again, I think Virizion's completely right here, and she's speaking from experience. This goes back to the nihilistic thought deal again, because she's basically describing the idea of effort not being real, or at least not having a real result. Once this registers as a fact in your mind, it is very hard to invalidate. However, from this explanation, Dunsparce is able to put two and two together and realize that trying literally can't make this particular situation, the bitter cold, worse, because trying is the one and only way to get past it. Dunsparce communicating the message in this way registered in the town as a logical idea that both undeniably makes sense and contradicts their previous line of thought, their negative line of thought. But who knows if Dunsparce would have even thought of this if not for Virizion giving her insight there. Virizion is making tangible change on the individual level, but just doesn't realize it. This brings us to the final 2 hours of the game when Keldeo finally appears on screen for the first time. And I love this part. From what the player knows to this point, I definitely expected Keldeo to be the cool guest character who saves the day for the team. Every PMD has one, right? Rescue Team has Absol, Explorers has Grovile, and Super, I mean, just take your pick. You have Archon, Buizel, Mawile, Ampharos, Esper, etc. And from how much Keldeo has been hyped up all game, mostly via Virizion's obsession with him, and the fact that he's been kept off screen the whole time, I'm expecting him to just be like a secret weapon. In hindsight, I guess it's pretty obvious that Hydreigon already filled this role, but whatever. Maybe they do it twice in this game. So he shows up, dramatically interrupting Muna, like a pony in shining armor, right? There's this info dump where the characters explain everything that happened with Keldeo before the game began, and during this part, Muna and Keldeo have a little standoff. Muna seems offended that Keldeo was arrogant enough to not only turn down her offer, but try to change her mindset. But Keldeo just kind of doesn't care that she's annoyed. Even after being imprisoned for presumably a long time, he still comes off calm and confident, much like Virizion, but also stoic, which is a trait that at the beginning of the game I would definitely not say Virizion had. But what's funny is that he kind of doesn't really do anything, right? Like, instead of Keldeo wiping the screen in a lust for revenge and display of power, Keldeo just stays true to himself. He does some smooth talking, and that's it. And then he kind of looks like a chump when he starts to collapse from being so tired. Espeon points out that Keldeo is probably pushing himself too much, but he just shrugs it off with a, I'm fine. Obviously, you're not fine, dude. He's been trying to be the hero all game by doing everything by himself, and it has not been working. Sometimes you really do need the help of others. While he does have a rock-solid mentality, Keldeo, to an extent, doesn't trust people either, just like Virizion didn't. Not because he thinks they're evil, quite the opposite actually. He has a lot of faith in Muna, but because he thinks things will just go smoother if he handles it himself and doesn't get anyone else involved. Keldeo then realizes this error during this scene and gives a heartfelt apology to Virizion while explaining himself. Virizion then similarly realizes that she should have just trusted Keldeo, or rather trusted in their friendship. Let's go back to near the beginning of the game, when the partner was telling Virizion about the power of trust, and she knew it was true because of her time with Keldeo. Then we consider that Virizion didn't realize how to make tangible change on an individual level, but now that Keldeo was in front of her, it became obvious. Just trust those around you. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Don't take things so personally when you don't need to. If she just did that with Keldeo in the first place, she wouldn't have spiraled into nihilism and spread negativity throughout the world. Character arc complete. To finish off the segment, I have to make some mention of the great scene in Swanna's Inn after the Bitter Cold is defeated. Virizion, Keldeo, Umbreon, and Espeon are talking about what it was like for Keldeo to be in the ice prison. Keldeo talks through his thought process of leaving the Enter cards behind, and Espeon is amazed that a plan with so many flaws ended up working out, and suggests that she could have come up with a better one. Keldeo takes this super personally and acts down on himself, apologizing to Espeon and hanging his head. Umbreon then whispers to Virizion, asking if Keldeo always acts like this, and Virizion responds by saying, quote, "In a pinch, he's the best Pokemon in the world to have by your side. But the mood swings, yes, unfortunately, they're also part of the same Keldeo I've always known." Unquote. The most hyped up character in the game, Keldeo, just ends up being some Captain Quark goofball. But all that matters in the context of Gates to Infinity is how Virizion views him. And that is obviously quite highly. It's not that he's perfect in general, but that he's perfect for her.